Okay, I will start my speech. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Chairperson. We closing government affirm the motion for two reasons. One, university should not be used as a means for just spreading propaganda, political propaganda for specific interest groups. Secondly, university play a specific role representing wider democratic interests. Those two things are our extension, and I would like to include rebuttals to the other side of the house into each of extension. So first extension, university should not be used as a means for propaganda for specific groups. We would like to assert that when the universities accept donations, they are very likely to publicize research and output catering to specific interests of groups justifying their biased advocacy, hence should reject donation. 4 levels of analysis. Number 1, what kind of institutions have a specific interest to fund universities? The kind of institution, even if they publicize advocacy, it's hard for them to gain trust and public support. And those are the kind of institutions that are likely to fund universities to legitimize their problematic activities. For example, the corporations that are using illicit substances or undermine environment and ecosystem, doing pollution and doing animal experiment, or political groups that are like a neo-Nazi or radical left-wing or ultra-right-wing parties, or the conservative Christian institution opposing abortion, gay marriages, or contraception and rights of LGBTQ, or Muslim Brotherhood who are spreading anti-Western sentiment or misogynistic norm. And these are the kind of institutions that fund university researches and politicize them and take advantage of their social brand and public recognition. And oftentimes, when these researches are backed up by the famous professors of universities, they can legitimize their activities. So the interests of these institutions are diametrically antithetical to public interest. And secondly, with capitals, they can systematically shut down counter discourses. When these institutions resort to financial capital, they can buy out a lot of university researches. That means they can systematically shut down countervailing views from minority opinions. The clash with opening opposition is that minority or marginalized groups can take part in discourse via donation in academia. We need to have a debate about what constitutes morality and immorality. The problem is the rich guys can just shut down and silence minority with less capital by taking away the opportunity for them to take part in academic discourse in the first place. Even if there are some individuals who have just cause to fight against corporate interests, they don't fight against it by using their pocket personal money. Hence, the debate about what's moral and what's immoral is systematically less likely to happen in a context of monopolistic structures funded by specific interest groups. Even if we concede that some minority groups or some groups that have different understanding of value could lose the avenue to deliver their political objective, we believe that is good. When the neo-Nazi or problematic institutions, not supported by society, lose ways to vocalize their grievances, I think that's a great thing. Democracy should strike down that kind of opportunities in the first place. Number 3, impact on class and lecture and session. The session and lecture held in university will be in favor of specific interest groups. So when the malfeasant relation between professors and interest groups are perpetuated, what teachers teach in class are also biased. So students subconsciously get indoctrinated with ideologically distorted conceptions. Even in job hunting or recruiting process, the professors introduce those companies to students. Hence, in a long term, the intergenerationally biased political ideology is socially and culturally perpetuated, and that's really problematic. Finally, number 4, prisoner's dilemma. In opposition's paradigm, what happens is that when all universities accept donations from problematic institutions or dangerous institutions, it creates a narrative that it is normal to cooperate with radical institutions in order for a research to happen. And what happens is the prisoner of dilemma or game theory happens. Because other uni get funds from those institutions, we have to get money too. Otherwise, we will go bankrupt. And this will create a mechanism of coercion. This directly clashes with open opposition. The premise of opposition's case is that uni have choices right now. They can choose what value they can subscribe to. They have their own standard, right? But that kind of choice is going to be undermined in the context of competition and coercion. because they have to rely on some institution for them to financially support the research. Thereby, they rely on the structure of dependency. That is why they will lose choices to decide which ideology that they subscribe to. Fundamentally, their argumentation about choice and ideological freedom is destroyed in a context of dependence. I would like to take point from opening opposition.
Yeah, your case is really convenient. Same with OG. It's just some universities are pro-LGBT. A vast majority of the world is conservative, moving towards the right. We've been fair and say it's 50-50, but it's actually like 7. So can you please be a team to engage why alignment itself is a fair thing to benefit individuals?
Firstly, we would like to notice that I don't think the motion is about motion is saying that immoral activity. So even if the institutions are even if the institution have the value to oppose abortion, and that is fine. But the problem is the kind of institutions that are aggressively and actively advocate the problematic ideology, such as doing political lobbying or practically disenfranchise minority groups in a religion or community or churches. Or these are the kind of institutions that we are talking about in this specific debate. Moving on to the principle of universities' role to play. Universities need to represent wider democratic interests. Number one, the public university bear a public responsibility to pay back to society in favor of wider democratic interests. That is, A, universities are funded and licensed, supported by state representing democratic will. And 2, universities bear a capacity to influence society and exert disproportionate impact on public opinion. Therefore, they bear a specific obligatory in line with the social interest. And secondly, university is the only institution to initiate counter-discourse against biased ideology. In a conservative area, when the conservatism is dominant or fundamentalism is dominant, university is the only institution to challenge the monopolistic and predominant social narrative. Finally, alternative. What is alternative? When the university get funded from the state or more neutral corporations and organizations, then we are still able to have a debate about what is immoral and what is not moral. Hence, the harm from opposition is not mutually exclusive. We are able to have a debate about morality and immorality even after taking this proposal, and therefore we are happy to propose. Thank you.
So we say that opening government only really talked about domestic things like schools and students, but we see that this closing government extended the case by talking about the severe impacts when universities are going to be coerced into the political agenda of these companies, individuals, or like different sponsors, right? So we think that the harms that we present are much, much greater than side opening government. And also I'm going to be engaging on the practical harms that were brought up by the opposition. So 3 clashes in today's debate. So first clash would be talking about mainly engaging with side opening opposition and closing opposition, and why the trade-off is still justified on our side of the house. Secondly, I'm going to talk about what is the actual responsibility of the university, and why it's so important for universities to actually say no to these kind of immoral institutions. But thirdly, about why our extension is something very important, and also why the trade-off is going to be justified. So firstly, about why engaging with things that both opposition speakers have talked about, right? So firstly, opening opposition talked about how their main case was contingent on the idea that immoral and moral things are very subjective. But firstly, we see that at the point at which they say that universities are going to be located in some kind of geographic location, or at the point at which they say most people at school are going to be Catholics or Christians, we think that most people in these kind of places, in similar places, are going to share similar views in the first place, right? So we think that at the point at which they have similar views, we don't think that there is going to be much tension in this kind of circumstance. But secondly, they also talked about how they would be disenfranchising these kind of minorities, and how there would be more underrepresentation on our side of the house. But firstly, we think that it's still going to be mutually exclusive because these minorities are going to be underrepresented on other side of the house, right? Because they're still going to be minority. But secondly, we say that this is a justified trade-off when we say that during the process, we can shut down harmful political propaganda that these kind of corporations and institutions are going to be trying to inflict on these universities. But thirdly, we say that like even if we're going to be like, even if they say that we're going to be having more underrepresentation of ours at house, we said that this isn't really the case, right? Because our like first speaker already talked to you about the fact that we can have more neutral actors like the state actors, or more like neutral actors that actually have a democratic will and aren't like corrupt or immoral in the first place, right? So we don't think that we don't think that this is like very true coming from side opposition, or like, at least coming from side opening opposition. But let's engage to what the coalescing opposition said, right? They talked about how there's like going to be like more scholarships for minorities. But is this premises really true? Because we say that these kind of institutions are probably more likely to coerce, because notice that our first speaker already talked to you about the fact that these kind of institutions, these organizations, and these individuals are not just like having very immoral values, but these are also the kind of institutions that are actually actively they're actually carrying out these kind of immoral values. So like, for example, actively protesting gay marriage or actively lobbying politicians, right? So these are the kind of institutions that we were talking about. So are these institutions more likely to give scholarships to minorities? We don't think so. But secondly, even if they talk about how these kind of colleges or universities are in need of money, we still very much prefer state or more neutral actors to get involved. So secondly, I like to be talking about what is the actual responsibility of a university and which side does it better. So firstly, what did opening opposition talk to you about? Opening opposition talked about the importance of giving choices. Firstly, we say that choice is dependent on the dependency, and so we don't think that this premises actually stands. But secondly, we say that it's also under the premises that the choices that we are giving them is good. When we already deny the fact that the choice that we are giving them is like, when we already say that the choice that we're giving them in the first place is something that's very detrimental because it's already immoral, we don't think that this is a choice that we should be giving. But thirdly, we say that like even if like choice is very important, like principally, we say that people already usually know the university agenda. So if they were an LGBTQ, they probably wouldn't go to a school that doesn't support LGBTQs, right? So when people already know consciously what kind of school they're going to, we don't think that they would be expecting like minority or like different options in the first place. But fourthly, they never really considered what kind of discourse would occur. They only talked about like how discourse is important for like more different views, but what kind of discourse will occur, and is this actually specifically good discourse, right? So we said that on their side of the house, the only kind of discourse that will happen is about how the university is becoming more like politically coerced by these companies, by these institutions, by these individuals, right? So we don't think that this is a good kind of discourse, especially considering the fact that the universities have this obligation to their students, to the people that they're catering to stick to some kind of value. And when they make this kind of like, at the point at which they make like funding with these kind of immoral actors that actively go against what the school is trying to push, we don't think that this is a good image of the school. And also we don't think that this would create the good kind of discourse, right? It would probably be more like more tension within the school, more active arguments within the school. We don't think that this is a good environment education system in the first place. So we think that the responsibility of a school is to make sure that that we are accountable, right? So we think that at the point at which your first speaker already talked to you about like things like, you know, for example, children shouldn't be catered toward like different, very contradicting views. We think that because children are still very gullible, we don't think that like we don't think that we should take funding from an institution that actively goes against the school agenda, because this would lose accountability within the school, meaning even worse school environment. But a third clash, let's base the third clash on like extension and why this certain trade-off is justified, right? So what is the trade-off? We think that the trade-off is that like there will be less options and less discourse, right? But we think that this trade-off is going to be justified at the point at which we don't put the university at harm, right? We don't put society at harm by actively pushing these harmful political agendas. We already characterized the kind of harmful institutions that were most likely to do this in the first place, and their incentives and their capabilities, right? At the point in which we already did this, we don't think that like it's necessary to put universities at more harm. Also considering the fact that these, you know, at the point at which they are more likely to coerce media narratives by like partnering up with these kind of universities. We don't think that this is a justified trade-off that we should be taking when this already puts society at a huge risk. That's why we're so proud to